from the man himself. And I'd like to thank Eileen from Macmillan for being here. There's Eileen at the back. And our special guests from the Australian High Commission, the Brodies. Thank you very much for being here, guys. Thank you. We're going to keep it informal this evening. We're just going to have a bit of a Q&A. So I'll ask the questions and you can answer as you will. And then we'll open it up to the audience after that, if that's... So everybody keep your questions for later. My first question is, you came to South Africa in 1995, which is quite a long time ago. What changes have you seen in the country since then?
Thanks, Kirsten. And it's great to be here. It's great to see so many people here. It's always nice when someone shows up, trust me. And I love this place. I mean, a bookstore with a bar. I know where I'm staying. Every bookstore should have a bar. Yeah, no, it's a very, very good question. And Nicola and I, my wife Nicola's here in the audience as well too. We came here in 1995 on what was supposed to be a once-in-a-lifetime trip, you know, and it turned out to be anything but, because what happened to us happens to quite a lot of foreigners that we've met. I don't know whether you get bitten by something or you breathe something in or you drink something, but this place got under our skin within a matter of days, and by the end of that first 3-week holiday, we had already booked our next holiday back the next year. So we certainly got hooked. And I think, like a lot of first-time visitors, the big attraction for us, to be quite honest, was getting out into the bush and seeing wildlife. And of course, we were bowled over. I mean, the Kruger Park was the first place we went to. After the Holiday Inn Garden Court at Tambo Airport, the next place we stopped was Pretoria Scott Camp. And that's no doubt where we fell in love, got addicted to the continent. And of course, we didn't really know what to expect, but I mean, here was this magnificent park full of these magnificent animals, and we carried on from there. We had a little rented Corolla. We found the only rental company in 1995 that would let us take a car out of South Africa at the time, because I think that even the big car hire companies were still too nervous to let anybody do it, and especially Australians, yeah. And I think the two guys that ran the company that let us take the Corolla out of the country probably weren't expecting it to ever come back. It was in such bad shape. I think the business plan was probably predicated on not coming back. Yeah, but to answer your question, we then went up to Zimbabwe, which at the time was relatively harmonious, quite prosperous, and a big tourist destination for South Africans. So we have certainly seen changes since '95, and we've learned a lot. I mean, I think we've gone from being purely tourists who become a bit goggle-eyed with the majestic wildlife and the stunning scenery and the wonderful sunsets and sunrises, and writing books, you know, I have to learn about some of the problems that the country faces, that the continent faces. And of course, it's not all rosy and wonderful. And things have not got better in some ways. But in other ways, things have, you know. I think what keeps me coming back every year and making me want to live on this continent and in this country in particular is the incredible potential that is here, the incredible goodwill of the ordinary people that I meet, my friends, the people I meet, the people who work where we live. Despite the problems that they face, they are overwhelmingly positive, you know, and hopeful. And I think that hasn't changed. If anything, that's got stronger. I think the will of people to really make a go of things in this country gets stronger. I mean, it has to, and I hope it comes to fruition one day. We spend a lot of time in the park. When Nelson Mandela passed away, I was asked to write something about what I thought the biggest changes were in South Africa in that time. And of course, he'd come to power just before we came over. And I had to think about it, and I was going for a drive in the Kruger Park, as we do, because we live in a house in a game reserve, and a few of my neighbours are here as well. And we were on the edge of the Kruger Park. So we'll sort of drive through the Kruger Park to do our shopping. We'll go to Hazyview and go in one gate and come out the other gate. So I thought I'd better think about this, and I drove in the gate. And it was actually the day of the funeral, so it was a public holiday. And in front of us was a BMW, a nice new model BMW. And in the car was a mum and dad and two little kids making use of the day off, the holiday, to go into the park, as were lots of other people that day as well too. And I thought that's totally cool. Why not make use of this wonderful resource and take the family somewhere beautiful to perhaps honour the man in a way like that. But here's the difference between then and 1995, is that they were African people. And I don't recall seeing any African tourists in Kruger National Park on my first visit, or indeed my first few visits. And I thought about this, and I thought that's probably the thing that I have noticed most in my neighbourhood. And I think it's a good legacy, and I think it's incredibly promising, because while I was riding the Cull, we took a drive, friends of ours and I, another couple, we drove from here to Tanzania, up to the Serengeti and back, 11,000 k's. And it was wonderful, it was great. But the further we got from South Africa, the fewer people we saw in the national parks, the fewer local people we saw in the national parks, because the reserves, you know, as you move through, still patronised by locals in Zimbabwe from all sections of society, but through Zambia and Tanzania in particular, all we saw was overseas tourists on tour vehicles. Even though local people have a heavily discounted rate in Tanzania, they weren't in there, they weren't using the national parks, whereas the Kruger Park is something that is treasured by all South Africans, or a majority of South Africans now. And that flows through to an understanding of the need to conserve the country's wildlife, which is something I'm really big about. So that's one thing I've seen change. And I've seen, what I haven't seen change is the dedication of the men and the women on the ground in this country to protecting that wildlife and conserving that wildlife. And I came back from that trip last year totally convinced of something that I already suspected, and that is, yes, the cost of staying in national parks gets more expensive, and you might argue that service goes up and down, but I'll tell you this from someone who's just driven over a large chunk of Africa. This country has the best run, the best value for money, and the most embraced and used game reserves and national parks on this continent, without a doubt.
That's very good to know. So you've obviously got Africa in your blood now, and you travel extensively throughout Africa researching all your books. Do you have a favourite area, one that speaks to you more than any of the others?
Yeah, I've got a few, actually. I think it depends on kind of what your definition is. As I said before, we were introduced to South Africa, to Africa via the Kruger Park, and I love it. I mean, it's a place so close to my heart. I really do. It can be infuriating sometimes. It can be very busy and very crowded, a little bit chaotic or whatever. But it's a wonderful flagship for this country. You know, it really is, and I love it. We were for a number of years based out of Zimbabwe. Before we bought our house over here, we had our old Land Rover and it lived on a farm in Zimbabwe, and unfortunately our friends got kicked off their farm eventually, and we ended up moving our goods as well to South Africa down here. I love Zimbabwe. It's a country I've written about in a few books, and it's a country that I hope and pray will come right again. And so, yeah, I think if from matters of the heart, you know, my heart is probably here, but I love visiting Zimbabwe. I love the Lower Zambezi area around Manipals. And I've written about Namibia. I love Namibia. You know, I think it's a great, great country. It reminds me of the outback. It's like the outback with animals. But I love it. Yeah. So I've got a few favourite places, but I mean, I think it's no accident we chose to buy a house on the edge of the Kruger Park.
So I don't know if many people know, but you spend 6 months of your year in South Africa and 6 months in Sydney, Australia. How do you decide where you're going to spend the summer? Because they're both Southern Hemisphere, so how do you choose? Where do you alternate, or which one do you do?
Yeah, it's I think, you know, we sort of come and go a bit these days. We used to come for 6 months at a time. And when I had a day job, I'm very proud, very blessed, happy to say that my day job is writing now, but I used to have to go back to Australia and work very, very hard for 6 months and then come back over here and blow all the money that I'd saved up. So Nicola works both sort of full-time when we're in Australia and part-time via the internet, via online when we're here. So we kind of have the luxury of being able to come and go a bit. And I think we appreciate both continents, both countries, at different times of the year, you know, and so we mix it up a little bit. We've both just got our mums, and we both each got one sibling, and each sibling has lots of children or has children. So Christmas, we kind of don't get a look in at Christmas. We tend to have Christmas over here in Africa because our mums are too busy with all their grandchildren at Christmas. And we do go home in the middle of the year, which is a bit of a shame because, of course, when we're out in Lowvale, it's lovely weather, June, July. It's also quite busy, so we kind of go home and do a bit of work in June, July. But we mix it up with it. Also, we have very different lifestyles. So we live in the bush on a game reserve when we're in South Africa, and we love that. And our nearest shop is 40 k's away, and we're surrounded by wild animals. And in Sydney, we live in a 2-bedroom flat on a 6-lane highway. So it's a very city existence. And I think, you know, I appreciate living in both countries. I think we are, and I don't want to joke about it because I think we're incredibly fortunate, and I don't take that for granted. But I love both countries, and it's especially as Ron's here from the embassy. I won't say which one I like. Love Australia.
Okay, this is a question especially for our authors that we have here. Unlike many authors, you don't do much planning before you start writing a book. So can you tell us a little bit about your writing process?
It's interesting. I wrote a book when I left work in 1996. I left full-time work with the support of Nicola to go and try and write a book. And I had read a couple of textbooks about how to write books. And they both said, you have to have a plot. You must have a plan. You must know the beginning, the middle and the end of the book. You must know who all the characters are, what they look like, what their names are, what their history is. I thought, okay, fine. Well, I left work and I'd only given myself 6 months to write a book. And I thought, how am I going to think up a story? And how am I going to think up characters? It was incredibly difficult. I wasted so much time trying to plan this story. And I wrote this book set in the outback. Because they said they have to research. So I'd never been to the outback, so I read lots of books about the outback and looked at lots of TV shows and watched Crocodile Dundee and stuff like that. and I like historical fiction, so I thought I'd set it in the Second World War. So I read loads and loads of stuff about the bombing of Darwin in the Second World War. And I wrote this book set in the outback in the Second World War. I followed all the rules. It was really difficult. This is the one thing that I had wanted to do since I was a little kid. The only thing I wanted to do that I could ever remember, whenever any grown-up said to me, what do you want to do when you grow up? I said, I want to write a book. And they would all laugh at me and tell me how it would never happen and I'd never get published and all that stuff. But I knew that's what I wanted to do. So here I had 6 months, I'd left work, I wrote this book, and it was just damn hard work. And it was no fun, because as soon as I started writing it, I knew how it was going to end. Anyway, I wrote this book, got to the end, read through it, and it was the biggest load of rubbish that I had ever read in my entire life. I'll tell you how bad it was. I wouldn't show my wife. I was too embarrassed. So I thought, I've got to get someone else to read it. So I sent it to my mum. And she read it. And she came back to me a couple of days later and she says, yes, very nice, dear. And you know, if that's the best your mum can come up with, it was rubbish, yeah. So when we came on our third trip to Africa about 3 years after that, I went back to work. We actually came back for a 4-month trip because we both ended up with a bit of time on our hands. We bought our old Land Rover and we set off on a 4-month trip around Southern Africa. And I thought, well, okay, I've got time again. I could have another go at writing. And I thought about that first attempt, and that book went nowhere, deservedly so. Because I thought about it, and I thought, you know, I didn't enjoy the whole process of having to map out this story. Because it seemed very predictable as I was writing, and it was incredibly predictable. And so I thought to myself, I would no sooner want to sit down and write a book whose ending I knew, any more than I would want to pick up a book and read it if I knew what's the fun in that. So it was in Pretoria, Scotland, where it all began, starting off this 4-month trip, and I put out the little folding table and chair, and I sat there and I thought, I'm going to write another book. But I don't know what I'm going to write about. I'm just going to make it up as we go along. I thought, we're going on a 4-month tour in our own vehicle. We didn't really know where we were going. I thought, I'm going to write a book, and I don't need to know where I'm going. And there's going to be characters, sure, but who are they? I don't know. I'll have to get to know them as we go, as we travel. And I looked around the campground and there was an overland truck, you know, the old overland tour trucks, full of, you know, backpackers were carrying on, having the first drink of the day, putting their tent up, making too much noise. And I thought, these kids are in for the adventure of their lifetime. Because I remember my first trip around Africa and I thought, if I could recapture that wonder, that surprise, that awe that I had, I could set a book on a tour. So what I did is I wrote this novel, ended up being published as Far Horizon, and it's set on an overland tour truck. And everywhere that tour truck goes is where Nicola and I went, day after day. So each day when we packed up camp, moved to another location, I would put that place in the book. And, you know, I could talk about inspiration later. You need inspiration for a book. And if I needed an idea, because it's a thriller, what's going to happen to these backpackers? If they need to encounter a bit of mayhem or drama, all I have to do is pick up a newspaper or turn on the radio and I'll be confronted with a dozen or more ideas that are so bizarre from real life in South Africa that the only challenge I'll have is if I put it in a novel, no one will ever believe it. But I did, and so I made it up as I went along. And I really enjoyed it. I thought, if I don't know what's going to happen next tomorrow, neither, hopefully, will anyone who's reading the book. And I do know writers that plot, and I know Tony says she's written loads of books, and I don't know whether she does or not, but I know writers who do plot. And I think it would be nice sometimes if I could. It would be really nice. I'm writing a book at the moment, my 16th one. I'm doing 2 next year. And I thought, I would really like to know what's going to happen next, but I can't start thinking that way. Because if I do, I'll start second-guessing myself. So it's better just to kind of let it all flow, and then, at the end of the first draft, go back and fix it up.
You've commented in previous interviews that your readership, strangely enough, is predominantly women. Is that why your protagonist in your last 3 books has been the kick-ass lady mercenary Sonia Kurtz?
Very good question. Yeah, I mean, when I did start writing, I thought, well, look, I'll tell you what, I write for myself. I write to keep myself entertained. Because I'm the one that's going to sit there for 6 months and just work every day. You know, I've got to keep myself interested. I thought, I guess if I thought about it when I started writing, I thought I was writing books for people like me, right? For middle-aged white guys. But I didn't know who would read this. I didn't know if anyone would read these books. I didn't know if it'd get published. But then once it was published, the feedback I started getting from the publishers and my readers would indicate that at least half, maybe the majority of my readers are women. And I think that's great, because there's no reason why women can't read thrillers and stuff like that. That's all good. But I thought that's interesting, because now then when it comes to making someone like Sonia the heroine of the book, because the Cull is the 3rd book that she's appeared in. She's in the Delta and Empty Coast. I like books with a strong female lead. Always have. Ken Follett always has very strong females in his books, and so do other people that I've read. And I love South African authors. I don't know if anyone's ever read any of Margie Orford's books. I love her books. Crime novels set in Cape Town. It's really strong female character. So I would write books with, I hope, strong female characters in them. And then it came time to write The Delta, which I thought will be about mercenaries, because I've met a couple of mercenaries around the traps. I thought, well, I can have a male mercenary, but I thought that's going to be a bit Bruce Willis-ish. But I was reading a book called Against All Odds by a guy called Eben Barlow, who set up Executive Outcomes, the mercenary firm. And ideas for stories can come from a single line in a conversation or something I've read. And he said that when he was setting up Executive Outcomes in the 90s, he was getting a lot of ex-South African Defence Force people joining. He says he was surprised by the number of female ex-serving members that came along to the interviews wanting to join up. And I thought, aha, a story, an idea. And so I have brought her back, and she starts off the book with an all-female anti-poaching unit. Now, if you look at the way I write, not only do I not have a plan, I don't have any idea, I have a premise. And the premise for starting the Cull was that I had read and seen online about a group of people called the Black Mamas. Has anyone heard of the Black Mamas? It's South Africa's first all-female anti-poaching unit. I thought, I've got my kick-ass leading lady mercenary, I'll bring her back and I'll have her working and training with a bunch of ladies in the anti-poaching unit. Now here's the funny thing. I think it's funny. I'm writing fiction, but quite often real life intervenes. So I was contacted by a guy called Andrew Crichton, out of the blue, who's involved with a group called Veterans for Wildlife, which is a UK-based charity, but mostly South African membership, who pair military veterans from the recent wars in Afghanistan and Iraq and other conflicts with anti-poaching units in. They come out and they train them. Things like first aid and leadership skills and stuff that they can pass on the benefits of their knowledge to. And I found out they were doing some work with the Black Numbers, and I got to meet these ladies. And I had started writing this book with this fictitious all-female anti-poaching unit, and then I got to read the real thing. And as it turns out, when I met them, they're being mentored by a female British Army officer who's come along to help them. So real life intervened. And I just wanted to say one thing about these ladies when you meet the real life. So I've seen the Black Numbers online, I've read about them, and they're about breaking down gender stereotypes, they're about empowering women, they're about uplifting people from the disadvantaged communities around that Uluru Reserve, Aquanook and places, and Bushbuck Ridge, where poverty is a big issue. They're ticking all the boxes. And they do a very good job. They patrol the perimeter fence of the Uluru Reserve, they look for tracks, they pick up snares. Now, in my military service, I was in the Australian Army Reserve for 34 years, and I served in Afghanistan in 2002. But I was a PR officer, a public relations officer. Liar for hire, they used to call it. So I've seen all this, and I think, yep, that all looks good. That's a really good story, you know. But when I got to meet these ladies, this was not just a story. This was not just a piece of PR. Because I've served with military people from around the world, from many different countries, particularly in Afghanistan. And I've served with Special Forces people, the Australian SAS, American Special Forces. I've met ex-South African Recce commandos. I mean, I've met some seriously dedicated people. But here's the kicker. When I met those ladies from the Black Bombers, courtesy of Andrew, I will tell you hand on heart that I have never come across a group of people in uniform, male or female, who were as dedicated, as motivated, as excited about doing their job and as committed as those ladies out there in Hoedspruit. And South Africa should be damn proud of them.
Many of your books, and this one in particular, centre around poaching. What do you think has to be done to rid this scourge from our parks and our reserves?
Soapbox. I'll try and keep it quick. Look, my personal view from living on the edge of the park and meeting people involved in the fight against poaching and having seen it, having seen the repercussions, is it's my personal opinion that the South African national parks, police and military are doing an excellent job, particularly in the Kruger Park. They have really got their act together. And the average men and women who are in the bush now as we sit around having a drink and talk about books, the people who put their life on the line literally every day to protect this country's wildlife deserve our respect and our thanks. Now, there will be a few bad apples in the bunch, like any part of society. But I think the war is being fought pretty damn well on the ground, and I think it's getting more organised. But as I said before, my job in the army was like PR, public relations, marketing. Now, one thing we learned in the conflicts in Afghanistan and Iraq is that you can have the best soldiers in the world. You can have the best military fighting force, you can have the most drones and the most missiles and bombs and everything like that. But you're not going to win against fundamentalism and terrorism unless you can stop people thinking that that's a good thing to be involved with. So you have to fight the war in what the Americans call the cognitive space, which is the brain up here. And unless you can change people's views and motivations, you're never really going to win, no matter how good you are on the ground. And it seems quite obvious to me that's the problem with the poaching problems. Unless we can change the demand, reduce the demand for things like rhino horn, elephant ivory, penguin scales, vulture heads closer to home, unless we can change that, it doesn't matter how good we are at fighting war. Now, people say you'll never do that. I say no, you can. but you need to properly resource it. It needs a lot of money. It needs to be done at the strategic level. This needs to be done at the government-to-government international level to make sure that as much, if not more money than is being spent to fund drones and helicopters and radar gear and stuff here, and boots on the ground, is being put into campaigns to change people's opinion. Okay, at that point someone says, you'll never stop these people in Vietnam and China and places, from wanting to consume rhino horn and ivory. I disagree. Anybody ever learned to play the piano as a kid? I did. We had an old Steiner piano that was 99 years old. Well, there's scratch one dead elephant, okay? We don't do that anymore because we think that's not a cool thing to do anymore. We don't make billiard balls out of ivory anymore and stuff like that. So demand changes over time. A lot of rhino horn used to go to Yemen to be used as carved dagger handles. That's not happening anymore. People in Yemen are too busy trying to survive a war. Things change. But in Australia, I will say about our country, it is a very safe, law-abiding country because we have a lot of zero tolerance for a lot of bad things, like drink driving. Everybody has to wear a seatbelt, which is very good. I think more people in South Africa should not drink when driving and should wear seatbelts and things like that. And not many people smoke anymore, and people use the pedestrian crossings rather than jaywalk because you get in trouble for that as well too. And we don't litter. Not because we all woke up one day and decided we're going to be good, law-abiding people, because we were shamed into not doing those things. Because our governments learned that, and public health authorities learned that you can have well-funded advertising campaigns that basically create a movement within society to say, no, we don't tolerate that anymore. We have a campaign to stop people littering. It's called Don't Be a Tosser. And it's to stop people putting their cigarette butts down the road. So it's aimed at the smokers as well too. But it sort of basically consists of all these people standing around looking at someone who's just dropped their stompy on the ground and saying, oh, you awful person, you're terrible, you know. So we shame people into changing their behaviours. And I'm involved with a charity in Australia called Breaking the Brand, which is doing just that with the people that buy rhino horn in Vietnam. Because the lady that runs it, Lynn Johnston, Breaking the Brand it's called. Have a look at it online if you remember. She's been to Vietnam, quite a courageous lady, wheedled her way into these syndicates and met the people that buy rhino horn. And she's a behavioural psychologist. She's worked out what makes them tick. They don't care about dead rhinos. They don't care about orphan baby rhinos, goes over their head, not interested. What they care about is losing face and being shamed. And so she's running targeted advertising campaigns with her shoestring budget to try and convince these businessmen that flaunt this stuff around. And what you're doing is not cool. And if you give a business partner some rhino horn that happens to have a bit of poison in there or whatever, you might make them sick and that will shame you. And they're all of a sudden thinking, well, hey, that's not so cool anymore as well too. So it's in its infancy, but that's what I think needs to be. I think we're doing a pretty good job on the ground. Could always do more, could always do better. But I think this is a problem that's worldwide. It's not just something that can be fought in the Kruger Park.
As many of us know, every day in Africa is an adventure. Sometimes good and sometimes not so good. Can you tell us about a few of your most memorable experiences that you and Nicola have had?
I'll try. I do talk a lot. I'll try and keep it short. We got chased by a black rhino once in Zimbabwe, driving along through Wangi National Park, and unfortunately you don't see many rhinos up there. We looked up, I drove along, and there was this black rhino in the bush. I thought to Nicola, oh look, there's a black rhino, isn't that good? It's put its head down and charged us. We're in our old Land Rover, and this thing was seriously coming to get us. So it took off as fast as I could in my 2.25 litre diesel Land Rover, which is not very smart. This thing was coming after us. It was chasing us down the road, and it was galloping. I mean, I coaxed our old girl up to 40 k's an hour, and this thing was on our spare wheel on the back. I thought, I'm driving along going, Nicola, take a picture. She's going, drive, it's trying to kill us. And I'm going, it's a black rhino, yes, go. And this thing chased us from Musuma Dam to halfway to Mandabu. Everyone knows that. Halfway from Musuma to Mandabu. It's 5 k's at 40 k's an hour. This thing, she wanted to kill us. We found out it was a female. Lost it eventually. Went up to Cinematella camp and reported to the ranger. And we were chased by a black rhino. And he goes, that's Chori. Well, I didn't know it had a name. And she was trying to kill us, I said. And he says she was hungry. I said, well, as far as I know, they don't eat people. I said, tell me what about this black rhino? Anyway, so Chawori's story. I'll keep it to one story. It's quite a nice story, anyway. Well, it's a double-edged story. She was an orphan. Her mum had been killed by poachers up in the Matusadona National Park in Zimbabwe. And she had been hand-raised by National Park staff in Matusadona, and subsequently, when she grew up, was relocated to Wangi National Park. The only unfortunate thing was that whenever she saw a green Land Rover, she thought it was the National Park's food truck. And she was forever chasing Land Rovers around the park. So I went back to Zimbabwe the next year, as we do, we go every year, and I saw Oscar the ranger that I'd seen. I said, how's Chawori the rhino? And he says, she's gone. And I said, has she gone to Botswana? Because he also told me she had a habit of wandering across the border through the forest. There's no fence there into Botswana. And the Botswana wildlife authorities would dart her and pick her up and bring her back to Zimbabwe, which is very nice of them. And she says, and Oscar says, no, she's gone. And he said, we think she's been killed. So I went back to Australia, and I was talking to a chap called Nicholas Duncan, who runs an organisation called the Save the Rhino Foundation in Perth. And he and I have done a couple of fundraisers together. He knows all the rhinos, he knows all about what's going on in Zimbabwe. And I said to him, did you hear about Chawori? And he said, yeah, I did. And I said, it's terrible, isn't it? And he said, what do you mean? And I said, well, I heard she's been killed by poachers. He said, no. He says, Chawori did what she quite often did. She walked across the border into Botswana. And the Botswana wildlife authorities were so sick of darting her and bringing her back that they kidnapped her and took her to the Kama Rhino Sanctuary in central Botswana, where she lived today and recently had a baby. So, happy African story. And an adventure, scary adventure.
Okay, here's a throwaway question. Australia has some brilliant wines and some stunning food, because I've been there. What is your favourite South African dish? And do you and Nicola have a dish, South African dish, that you like to cook for your friends in Australia?
Yeah, the one I like to, I'll take the end first, the one I like to cook the most is the beer can chicken, because is that not the most obscene thing you've ever seen? When I show pictures of that to people in Australia, they're proudly South African invention, the beer can chicken. I love it, just for the shock value. It's a terrible waste of a can of beer, though. It's always one of those bittersweet moments when I cook the beer can chicken. We love the food and the wine here. We're so lucky in Australia, you know, and we're even luckier here because it's cheaper. but we love South African wines. I'm a big fan of the Shirazes, of the Zandvoort Shiraz, and fillet, I love Baboti spring rolls. But yeah, no, we're big fans of the country here and everything that it has to offer. And again, I think, you know, having travelled up through a fair bit of Africa, not all of it, it also reminds me that it's good to get back to this home here, because we're very lucky with the produce we have, and long may it continue, I think, because, you know, there's a great agricultural sector here and it produces great world-beating sort of stuff. So I think we're very, very lucky here.
Have you eaten mapani worms?
I haven't yet.
What did you think?
I like
Crunchy. You've said you don't see what you do now as a job because you love it so much, and you're very lucky. What advice would you give someone who wanted to give up the rat race and follow their passion?
Do it. Yeah. Do it, yeah. Look, it's easy to say. It's hard to do. It took me a long time, you know, and I think I couldn't have done it without my wife. I couldn't have, you know, not just because she was able to support me when I first left work. I had a very good job, you know, and it was a well-paid job. And when I went to work and told all my friends, I was working in a PR company in Sydney, and when I told them I was leaving to write a book, they thought I was crackers. One of them says to me, "You're an idiot. don't do this. Why would anyone leave a job like this?" And another one said to me, "You'll never get published. No one in Australia gets published." Well, my uncle wrote a book and it was great. You're not going to get published. He didn't get published. You're not going to get published. Another bloke said to me, "There's no money in it." Well, he was kind of right. For the first few years, that's for sure. And another bloke said to me, another mate of mine said to me, he said, "You were sacked." I said, "I wasn't sacked. I said, I'm leaving my job to follow my dream and write a novel. He says, no one's that stupid. He says, you were sacked and you're just too embarrassed to tell anyone, so you've made up this story. So you can't listen to the naysayers. You can't listen to the naysayers if you are 110% sure that this is what you want to do. Now, you might not succeed, and I didn't succeed with my first attempt. I failed dismally, and I drifted back to work. And it took a lot more courage, I think. I'm not saying I'm a brave person. Let me rephrase that. It was harder for me to try again than it was the first time. The first time was, hey, I'm going to follow my dream, I'm going to write this book. And I was so full of myself, I thought I could do it in 6 months, and I thought, if I can't write a book, no one can. And I failed. And I probably failed because that was my attitude. The second time around, I thought, I'm going to try something different because I'm still committed to it. And I know that I can have a good job and we can have a good life. But I'll spend the rest of my life thinking, maybe I should have given it one more try. So even if you want to follow your dream and you don't at first succeed, try again. And I think writing's one of those funny things. Tony will probably say the same thing. That, look, it's nice to do it. If you can make a living out of it, that's fantastic. I feel like I'm retired, getting paid to do my hobby. It's fantastic. I love it. But I don't think a lot of us... I'm not a sporty person, right? But I never was. But I use a sporty analogy. I do like to run and I do like to swim. Not particularly good at either. I'm never going to be a Robert D. Costello. I'm never going to be an Australian champion marathon runner. I'm never going to be a Thorpe. I'm never going to be a champion swimmer. I'm too slow. No good at it. But I didn't stop running and swimming because I thought I'm never going to represent my country or make $1 million out of endorsement. I kept running and swimming because I enjoyed it. Probably why you play rugby as a kid, most of us, or play cricket or footy or whatever, because we enjoy it, not because we think we're going to go make millions out of it. And so if you're following your passion, it's got to be the same. You've got to write because you love it. Because trust me, if you don't love it, it's not worth it. If you do love it, it can be.
And my last question is, you did touch on it a bit earlier, but your 2 new projects for next year, can you give us a bit more info?
Thanks. I've got a few of my Facebook friends here. They're always good at giving advice. They say, write faster. I say, read slower. Oh, the hassle I get. So now I've had a few years in the past where I was writing some non-fiction, mostly for the Australian market, unfortunately, so not a lot of it came through here. But I could do 2 books a year. I could do a biography and a novel a year. And it wasn't easy sometimes, but I just think I could probably